Hello everyone, I am the Man at Kirby. Welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I will be discussing my take on a new commander from Final Fantasy, Terra Magical Adept. If you like this card or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel at no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You could also become a channel member for just 99 cents. Show off your support with a logo next to your name and exclusive emojis. Or you can always just support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Terra is a 4/2 human wizard warrior for 1 generic, 1 red, and 1 green. When she enters, you mill 5 cards and can recover an enchantment milled this way. While that might seem useful in a Graveyard Matters deck or something along that vein, I'm actually not playing at all with that ability. I am focused more on her trance ability. When you pay 6 mana and tap her, unfortunately at sorcery speed, she's exiled and returns transformed into Terra, a red-green 6/6 Saga wizard. Her first 3 chapters all do the same thing, which is creating a hasty token copy of a non-legendary enchantment we control, and if it was a Saga, we could put up to 3 lore counters on it. Unfortunately, the copy is sacrificed at the beginning of our next end step. So if we do copy a non-legendary Saga, we might as well give it 3 lore counters to make the most of it until it gets sacrificed. Her last chapter adds 2 mana of each color to our mana pool, then exiles it to return it transformed into Terra Magical Adept again. Thanks to this chapter, while Terra is red-green per se, she has a Woober color identity, allowing us to run any legal commander card in the deck. Again, this is the ability that I focus on more when building the deck. It's therefore very heavy on Sagas and the best kind of synergy, in my opinion at least, for it. Similarly to my Tom Bombadil deck, which you can find a link to at the end of this video. Alright, first things first, it is possible to go infinite with Terra in a couple of ways. While you can do so with either Spark Double, Audon Soldier, the Apprentice's Folly, Hum of the Host, Irenicus' Vile Duplication, and Quantum Misalignment, because these can all create a non-legendary token copy of Terra. Therefore, any of those first 3 chapters can create a token copy of itself. Don't worry, I'm going to explain in great detail how this combo works and how to avoid falling into an endless loop with it that ends the game in a draw. However, I just want to indicate that, for my own deck, I only included these 3 and not all 6 of them. You can if you want the deck to be more consistent in terms of comboing off, especially if you're not running any tutoring effects. I'm not running any tutoring effects either. But I decided to have the deck be more than just a consistent combo deck. I wanted it to play somewhat differently each time I played it, and to also keep it in bracket 2. Sure, it can win with this combo, but can also do a bunch of other interesting things in the meantime or if the combo is disrupted. In any case, like I previously mentioned, these all help create infinitely many non-legendary copies of Terra. So let's see how the combo works using any of them as an example. First, we need to have Terra transform into her Saga form. Once we do, we can have either Spark Double or Audon Soldier enter as a non-legendary copy of Terra. When it does, its first chapter will trigger. We can then have it target itself since it is a non-legendary enchantment. We then create a non-legendary token copy of that Spark Double or Audon Soldier, cloning Terra. Notice that we can do this infinitely many times. Now, if you recall, that chapter also allows us to add 3 lore counters to it. If we have each chapter still target itself, we're just tripling infinity, which is still just infinity. So that's nothing special there. However, adding 3 lore counters to it allows it to reach its last chapter, adding 2 of each color to our mana pool. So then we'd have infinitely many 6/6 or 7/7 hasty attackers to win the game with, along with infinite mana of each color just in case. However, we need to be especially careful here. That chapter is not a you may ability, so you need to copy a valid target, so you might end up finding yourself in an infinite loop which would end the game in a draw before then. However, I'm here to explain how to get out of it. When you add those 3 lore counters to the very last copy you want, all the chapter triggers enter the stack simultaneously. What you want to do is have the last chapter ability resolve first, sacrificing that last Saga copy. Now it's now gone, the copied ability triggers will have no legal target and thus fizzle. You now have successfully ended the loop and have your game-ending board state. In order for this combo to work with the Apprentice's Folly, you have it target Terra when it enters the battlefield. It'll then also create a non-legendary copy of Terra that can continue copying itself with its first chapter, just as with Spark Double or Audon Soldier. You can then ignore the Apprentice's Folly while you create infinitely many hasty copies of Terra, and infinite mana of every color. Now, what if you can't attack because an opponent has you locked out of combat with pillar effects? Well, you can win outside of combat thanks to Narsi, Fable Singer, and All Will Be One. With Narsi, whenever these token copies get sacrificed by resolving their last chapter, Narsi has each opponent lose 3 life while you gain 3 life. Granted, you're going to also draw a card. So long as you have enough cards in your library, you'll clear off the table before then. All Will Be One pings an opponent each time you put a counter on a permanent or player. So every time those infinitely many sagas are getting lore counters placed on them, you're picking an opponent infinitely many times, killing off the table. The best thing about these cards is that they're also amazing on their own, outside of the combo. Narsi is still providing tremendous value, and All Will Be One can also pick off creatures or planeswalkers just by playing and using sagas. More synergy that can work whether we're comboing off with Terra or not is with other cards that also work with the rest of the sagas in the deck. For example, the previously mentioned Tom Bombadil is here. He can very easily have hexproof and indestructible in this deck, but that's not necessarily the point. It's his triggered ability. Whenever a saga reaches its final chapter, you reveal cards from your library until you hit another saga, and then put it straight to the battlefield. Triggering once per turn is only unfortunate if we don't have the infinite combo going. Otherwise, we might unnecessarily burn through a lot of our library getting those sagas out of it. Historian's Boon also cares about sagas reaching their final chapter. When one does, we create a 4/4 flyer with Vigilance. Fortunately, this is not limited to once per turn. If that weren't enough, as a bonus, we create a 1/1 weenie whenever a non-token enchantment enters our battlefield. Sigurd Jarl of Ravensthorpe is possibly one of the more insane ones here. Whenever we put a lore counter on a saga, we could put a +1/+1 counter onto another creature. While this is already strong with a lot of sagas in play, it also means infinitely pumping all of our infinitely many Esper Terra copies. This is just in case we're only allowed to attack with a single creature or other similar situations. In any case, he's still good even for just incremental value. Jorah Weatherlight Captain also cares about our sagas since she'll draw us a card whenever we cast one. However, she's better than that since she'll also trigger off of legendary and artifact spells, making her the best card advantage effect in the deck. Speaking of card advantage, the deck is running Argothian Enchantress, Sith's Harvest Hand, Enchantress's Presence, Mesa Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, Verduran Enchantress, which all draw us a card when we cast an enchantment, but Entity Tracker, Setessan Champion, and Eidolon of Blossoms draw us a card whenever an enchantment enters our battlefield, which is obviously way better, since they'll trigger off of token enchantments being created and whatnot. There are obviously more options in terms of other enchantresses, as well as effects that draw us cards when enchantments get sacrificed, etc. But I feel like the effects already included are enough already. Naturally, Reliquary Tower is included because it doesn't take up a slot on the deck, and can help us keep our fat hand. This might seem like a mistake since it's a 5-colored deck, but the deck will have no problems with color fixing, which we'll see later. Going back to Saga synergies, Displaced Dinosaurs makes it so those sagas are also 7/7 dinosaurs as they enter the battlefield, even if the saga is already a creature. It just becomes a 7/7. However, like Jorah, this isn't just for sagas. Any artifact will also be a 7/7 dinosaur as it enters the battlefield, same with any legendary permanent entering. This does so much work in the deck, similarly to Opalescence and Starfield of the Nyx. It might seem that the deck is low on creatures, but apart from Displaced Dinosaurs, the enchantments animate our sagas, making them able to attack and block. As a bonus, Starfield of Nyx can also reanimate an enchantment at the beginning of our upkeep, letting us reuse sagas. Desynchronization also cares about historic permanents. Granted, this is a global effect, so opponents will still keep their own legends, artifacts, and sagas, but the goal is for us to have way more than they do, especially if we're keeping any saga creatures in play. This can help us bounce most blockers to hand and swing in with a horde of enchantment creatures. Jorah's Familiar can reduce the cost of historic spells, which, again, is way better than just enchantments, since it also affects legendary artifact spells. That being said, the best mana acceleration will always be land-based, which is why the deck is running Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, and Rampant Growth. As mentioned previously, the first 3 are able to get mostly any tricycle land in the deck, making sure we're always in a good mix of colors to never be color screwed. Rampant Growth is included because at least one basic land of each type is included in the deck in order to have protection from Blood Moon type effects, as well as getting hit by Assassin's Trophy, Path to Exile, etc. In fact, the deck is running all 10 fetch lands, all 10 tricycle lands, and all 10 shock lands to never be color screwed. So even if one of each basic is included for protective purposes, and there are a handful of colorless mana utility lands, we should essentially never be color screwed. Sure, you could have a much cheaper mana base if you wanted to work with a much lower budget, especially since the majority of the deck's budget is in the mana base. So as with all my deck techs, you can include whichever lands you want and the deck should run just fine. In this case, Spelunking is also included in the deck to make sure all of these lands always enter untapped. As a bonus, we draw a card and drop a land when it enters the battlefield. I love this card. Earlier I mentioned recovering sagas in order to be able to reuse them. To that end, the deck is running Hall of Hela's Generosity and Ishgard the Holy Sea. Neither of these take up a slot on the deck, and as we just saw with the mana accelerants and mana base, we're fine enough to run utility lands like these. Casting Faith and Grief to recover 2 artifacts and our enchantments might seem overcosted at 5 mana, but keep in mind that we can just then play the land from the adventure. That's the trade for it not taking up a slot on the deck. Again, Arcanum Weaver is absolutely amazing here, providing a sort of revolving door for Sagas. Since we can activate him at instant speed, we can do so in response to the last chapter of a Saga entering the stack. Keep in mind that the Saga gets sacrificed when the ability resolves, so we activate again before then. We sacrifice that Saga with its trigger still on the stack to reanimate a different enchantment. Then the trigger resolves, still giving us that ability, regardless if the Saga is no longer there. Mastery of the stack is key in this deck in more than just preventing a game draw from infinite Esper Terra copies. Hannah Ship's Navigator can recover an artifact or enchantment for just 3 mana, and tapping, no hoops to jump through. While this is going to our hand, that's not a problem, since casting it later will undoubtedly trigger all those Enchantress effects, giving us further value. Tameshi, Reality Architect, and Goshin Tai of Life's Origin reanimate the enchantment, which is better in terms of mana efficiency. Granted, Tameshi will always cost just 1 extra white mana and bouncing a land, while Goshin Tai is always 5 mana, even if the Saga costs less than that. However, these are still amazing at helping us reuse Sagas time and time again. Speaking of reusing Sagas time and time again, another effective way to keep Sagas around longer is by removing lore counters from them and never letting them reach their final chapter until you finally want it to. Hex Parasite, Thrall Parasite, Aka Traveling Merchant, Power Conduit, Scholar of New Horizons, and Javier Sal Infested Captain can all remove a counter from our Sagas. The first 2 essentially just get the job done, but the others are amazing in their own regards. Oaka can draw us a card, which is never a bad thing. Power Conduit turns the lore counter into a +1/+1 counter onto a creature, or maybe even the same creature. Removing a lore counter from a Saga creature to then give it a +1/+1 counter is so satisfying. The Scholar turns the lore counter into land-based mana acceleration. Granted, it has to be a plains, but as we just saw, we'd be able to get any triple-typed or dual-typed land, so long as plains is one of those subtypes. Javier Sal populates when removing the lore counter, which is great at copying creature tokens, should we have any. This isn't really a tokens deck, but some of the Sagas can create creature tokens, so the ability, while here mostly to just remove lore counters, isn't just limited to that, and can give us quite the bonus when used. Nesting Grounds, while technically is moving the lore counter instead of just removing it, is still absolutely amazing here, because we can move the lore counter to another Saga in order to trigger the next chapter of that one, while also getting rid of the lore counter on the original Saga. Or if we don't want to do that, we could just move that lore counter onto a non-Saga permanent, which will do absolutely nothing to it, not affecting it in the slightest. It also doesn't take up a slot on the deck. I wish I was also able to run Giant Fan and Every Thingamajig version A in this deck for the same reason. Giant Fan is sort of like a copy of Power Conduit, since we can move the lore counter onto a non-Saga creature, turning it then into a +1/+1 counter. This version of Every Thingamajig has the same effect, but it can also actually put a +1/+1 counter on a creature or proliferate. Proliferating at instant speed with a bunch of Sagas in play can be very strong in the right situations. While I don't have any proliferate effects in the deck apart from Javier Sal, which I honestly rarely use anyways, the fact that I can move around a counter with the first ability is reason enough to run it. Unfortunately, these cards are not legal in Commander solely because of the color of their border. Because if you look at their abilities, there's nothing about it that is not black bordered. It's literally a combination of Nesting Grounds and Power Conduit. But I digress. I present these because they're amazing here if your playgroup allows you to run them, or if the rules for Commander finally allow for the inclusion of the non-egregious silver-bordered cards. For now, it is what it is. Alright, now it's finally time to discuss the Sagas I'm running and why I'm running them. First of all, each of the 21 Sagas in this deck all have interaction as one of their chapters, regardless of the level of interaction. The deck doesn't have any interaction apart from these Sagas, but sorcery speed interaction isn't that bad, especially since my build is a bracket 2 build anyways. Gadwick's First Duel, Summon Ixion, The Fall of Lord of Konda, The Princess Takes Flight, Trial of the Time Lord, Blink, Vault 13, The Dweller's Journey, Johnny Falls the Godsire, and Summon Primal Odin all deal with creatures right off the bat with their first chapter. Whether the creature's exiled, destroyed, tucked, nerfed, etc., these will get rid of a creature upon entering the battlefield. This also makes it easier to reuse by removing that first chapter later on, because then you can get that effect again at the beginning of your next draw step when it gets its first lore counter. They still have other useful abilities too, if we then let it keep going to their next chapters. Gadwick's First Duel has a Scry 2, then copy the next cheap instant or sorcery recast. Ixion puts +1/+1 counters on creatures and gains its life. Lord Konda has every regained control of their permanents and then returns transformed into a 1/3 defender that counters when dying. The princess pumps and gives flying to a creature. However, this is one that probably we'd like to deter as much as possible from reaching its last chapter, since the exiled creature returns to play. Same with Vault 13. Trial of the Time Lord, not so much though, since we can let it continue a bit since it does the same thing with its first 3 chapters. In any case, the creatures get bottom decked anyways. Blink shuffles creatures but also gives us creature tokens too. Ajani's Saga creates a creature token for us and then gives double strike until end of turn to a creature we control. Last but not least, Primal Odin can end a player with his second chapter if it manages to break through defenses, so it can also serve as literal player removal. It draws us cards as a bonus afterwards, but keeping it around while its second chapter is still active can help us end the game quickly too. Scroll of Isildur can also deal with creatures by tapping 2 down and giving them a stun counter. However, that's not when it enters, it's the second chapter. Its first chapter is Artifact Interaction by stealing it. I love stealing mana rocks with this, but keeping it around to continue doing so by removing lore counters from it. I once had 4 non-token copies of Sol Ring in a game thanks to doing so, since the 4th one was my own. But having access to 8 colorless mana with this inconspicuous saga was quite satisfying. Even being tempted by the ring enough times to max out can be useful too. Keep in mind that removing lore counters from sagas will not, I repeat, will not trigger previous chapters. It just means that you'd go to the next chapter after that at the beginning of your next draw step. Summon Valifor and the Eldest Reborn do provide creature removal when entering the battlefield with its first chapter. However, we don't get to choose the creature. It's still good interaction though, and their other abilities are also so useful. In any case, they're amazing against Voltron decks, or if the only creature an opponent controls were to have Shroud or Hexproof. Summon Leviathan and the Knight of the Doctor are the deck's board wipes because it happens right with the first chapter. I've been able to consistently lock out opponents from keeping creatures thanks to removing Leviathan's first loyalty counter with Power Conduit. It's essentially bouncing the whole board each turn it's not dealt with. Mean, but efficient. Next up are Awaken the Honored Dead, Binding the Old Gods, The Phasing of Jalfir, Elspeth Conquers Death, Battle at the Hell Vault, The Kami War, and Summon Behemoth. Each of these will deal with any non-land permanent. They can still hit creatures like the previous list, but hitting anything else is still incredibly useful. Awaken the Honored Dead also has a self-mill effect like Terra, but I try to avoid it happening. At least if it does, the deck does have recovery effects anyways. Binding the Old Gods has a land-based mana acceleration effect, which makes this one of the best sagas in the deck. The Phasing of Jalfir eventually wipes the board, giving players 2/2s instead, but we'll see the other board wipe effects in a moment. We can also use this defensively if we want to protect something of ours before a board wipe does happen. Elspeth's Saga has a stacks effect and then a reanimation effect, which is amazing. Battle at the Hell Vault gives us an Avacyn token for us letting us release those exiled permanents. I ain't even mad. The Kami War's second chapter is another interaction effect via bounce, then discard, but then returns transformed into a 6/6 flyer with trample that can get pumped while simultaneously providing a recovery effect. This saga is amazing. Hopefully you get it for free off of Tom Bombadil's trigger. Behemoth is absolutely busted, which is why it costs a whopping 9 mana to cast. Again, hopefully you get it for free from Tom Bombadil's trigger. After it blows up 2 things, we draw 2 cards, and then it could potentially end the game with its last chapter. Notice already how many different ways we can end the game with the cards and interactions in the deck, with and apart from Esper Terra combo. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Terra Magical Adept. Like I mentioned earlier, the goal is to transform her as quickly as possible and make the most of her copying non-legendary sagas to get further value from them. The deck can still function without Terra, making the most of the other 21 sagas in it, whether we're drawing cards, burning opponents, accelerating our mana, or doing other interesting things. I absolutely love this deck. And with access to all colors, you can build it however you want. You can run other types of sagas or other synergies with it if you wanted to. There really is no wrong way to build her so long as you're happy with it. That being said, if you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. I also want to thank any channel members. Your membership is greatly appreciated. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Mad Kirby, and happy brewing.